This is MTG Burgeoning, and in this video we are going to showcase the quintessential cards needed to build the core of a Rakdos commander deck with Rowan, Scion of War, as the general. Rowan, Scion of War, made her debut in Wilds of Eldraine and is a 4/2 human wizard with menace for 1 in Rakdos colors. That's 1 black and 1 red mana. We can tap Rowan to have black and or red spells we cast this turn cost X generic mana less to cast, where X is equal to the amount of life we lost this turn. We can only activate this ability as a sorcery. In typical Rakdos fashion, we must punish ourselves a bit in order to punish our opponents a whole lot more. Imagine if Rowan's activated ability did not include the dreaded activate only as a sorcery restriction. Nevertheless, in these colors, this limitation will not hamper us at all. We plan to inundate the core of this EDH deck with spells that cause us to lose life, but, of course, to the overall detriment of our opponents. Remember, damage also causes loss of life, so our self-inflicted loss of life does not have to come from only life loss spells. When we pair this life loss theme and Rowan's activated ability with a host of game-ending X spells, we will claim victory after victory over our Rakdos opponents. We begin filling the core of this build with spells that cause us to lose life and gain card advantage at the same time. Night's Whisper has us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Infectious Inquiry and Gruesome Realization follow suit, except the Inquiry also gives each opponent a poison counter, while the Realization has an option to give creatures our opponents control -1/-1 until the end of turn instead. Read the Bones has us scry 2 and then draw 2 cards. We also lose 2 life. Blood Pact and Sign in Blood have target player draw 2 cards and lose 2 life. Foreboding Fruit follows suit, except it has the Adamant mechanic, which means that if at least 3 black mana was spent to cast the spell, then we create a food token, for which we can pay 2 generic mana, tap and sacrifice to gain 3 life. The Toil side of Toil Trouble has us draw 2 cards and lose 2 life, while the Trouble side deals damage to target player equal to the number of cards in that player's hand. Since this split card has the Fuse mechanic, we can cast both halves of the card from our hand for the purposes of doubling up our self-inflicted life loss. Rowan's Grim Search and Succumb to Temptation continue our trend of drawing 2 cards and paying 2 life, but here we do so at instant speed. Rowan's Grim Search also has the Bargain mechanic, which allows us the option of sacrificing an artifact, enchantment, or token as we cast this spell. If we do, then before drawing our 2 cards, we first look at the top 4 cards of our library and put up to 2 of them back on top of our library in any order, and the rest into our graveyard. Both Ambition's Cost and Ancient Craving has us draw 3 cards and lose 3 life. For bigger burst card advantage possibilities, Ad Nauseam has us reveal the top card of our library and put it into our hand. We lose life equal to that card's mana value. We may repeat this process any number of times. Peer into the Abyss has target player draw cards equal to half the number of cards in their library, and that player loses half of their life. We round up each time. With one of our yet-to-be-revealed impactful X spells in our hand and Rowan on our side of the battlefield, Ad Nauseam and Peer into the Abyss can be considered win conditions in this build. For repeatable life loss effects, Necropotence provides us the option of paying 1 life to exile the top card of our library face down. We put that card into our hand at the beginning of our next end step. Necropotence has us skip our draw step, and whenever we discard a card, we exile that card from our graveyard instead. Note that we do not get to put the exile cards into our hand until the beginning of our next end step, but the life loss happens immediately, which means we can pay a chunk of life, activate Rowan, and possibly win the game that turn. Greed's card draw effect requires us to pay 1 black mana and 2 life. With enough black mana at our disposal, Greed could be considered a win condition as well. Dark Confidant, Phyrexian Arena, and Black Market Connections have triggers that require us to pay life during our turn. At the beginning of our upkeep, the Confidant has us reveal the top card of our library and put it into our hand. We lose life equal to that card's mana value. Phyrexian Arena has us pay 1 life and draw a card at the beginning of our upkeep, while at the beginning of our pre-combat main phase, Black Market Connections has 3 different modes from which to choose, and we may choose more than one. We create a treasure token and lose 1 life, we draw a card and lose 2 life, we create a 3/2 colorless shapeshifter creature token with Changeling and lose 3 life. Choosing all 3 modes is very enticing, with Rowan on our side of the battlefield. Tutor effects provide card advantage as well. Both Vampiric Tutor and Imperial Seal put a card from our library on top of our shuffled library for the cost of 2 life. Razaketh the Foul-Blooded requires the sacrifice of another creature, in addition to paying 2 life, to put a card from our library into our hand. Grim Tutor puts a card from our library into our hand as well, but this is for the cost of 3 life. Plunge into Darkness has 2 modes from which to choose, but we may select both of them if we pay its Entwine cost of 1 black mana. We sacrifice any number of creatures to gain 3 life for each sacrificed creature, or we pay X life, look at the top X cards of our library, put one of those into our hand, and then exile the rest. We have cards that provide mana flexibility as well. Treasonous Ogre has an activated ability that allows us to pay 3 life to add 1 red mana to our mana pool. Note that we do not have to tap the Ogre to activate this ability, which means we can pay 3 life as many times as we want. We also do not have to tap Blood Celebrant to activate its ability either. We pay 1 black mana and pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. We can loop this ability by adding a black mana each time we activate the Celebrant's ability. Through this dynamic, we can continue to use the black mana generated by the Celebrant and pay 1 life at a time to lose as much life as we choose. Carrick, Son of Yawgmoth, and Defiler of Flesh modify the black mana costs of our cards by replacing it with black Phyrexian mana, which allows us to pay these costs with either a black mana or 2 life. Rowan approves. As a bonus, whenever we cast a black spell, we put a +1/+1 counter on Carrick, and whenever we cast a black permanent spell, the Defiler gives target creature we control +1/+1 and Menace until end of turn. The Son of Yawgmoth also has lifelink, which helps us to recoup the life lost from the bevy of spells and abilities included in the core of this build. Defiler of Instinct continues our mana flexibility trend for red mana costs, and whenever we cast a red permanent spell, we deal 1 damage to any target, an ability with which we can target ourselves. Bolus's Citadel takes this mana for life conversion a step further. We may look at the top card of our library at any time. We also may play lands and cast spells from the top of our library, and if we cast a spell this way, we pay life equal to its mana value rather than paying its mana cost. Here, we can pay X for the generic mana costs of spells we cast from the top of our library as well. Note that if a spell has X in its mana cost, then we must choose 0 as the value of X when casting a spell without paying its mana cost. Generally, in building around series videos like this one, we leave the removal spells in the hands of each individual deck brewer. However, we would be remiss if we failed to mention some fabulously synergistic removal options for our theme. Feed the Swarm destroys target creature or enchantment an opponent controls, and we lose life equal to that permanent's mana value. Infernal Grasp destroys target creature, and we lose 2 life in the process. If we control a swamp, then we can pay 4 life instead of paying Snuff-Out's mana cost to destroy target non-black creature. It cannot be regenerated. We can pay a black mana and pay 2 life to have Villas, Broker of Blood, give target creature -1/-1 until end of turn. Whenever we lose life, we draw that many cards. These powerful Rowan synergizing abilities come stapled onto the body of an 8/8 demon with flying. As additional costs to cast Fire Covenant and Toxic Deluge, we pay X life. The Covenant deals X damage divided as we choose among any number of target creatures, while the Deluge gives all creatures -X/-X until end of turn. We have some other cards that provide us with unlimited life-losing abilities. We can pay 1 life to give Wall of Blood +1/+1 until end of turn. We can pay 3 life either to put a +1/+1 counter onto Soul Drinker, or to have Unspeakable Symbol put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. We can pay 1 red Phyrexian mana either to give Immolating Soul Eater or Molten Steel Dragon +1/+0 until end of turn. We can pay 2 life to have Doom Whisperer Surveil 2, which means that we look at the top 2 cards of our library and put any number of them into our graveyard, and the rest on top of our library in any order. This is a powerfully synergistic way to search through the top of our library for a win condition while also appeasing Rowan's life loss demands. We can regenerate Mischievous Poltergeist and Deepwood Ghoul by respectively paying 1 and 2 life, while the creature enchanted by Soul Channeling can be regenerated by paying 2 life. We can pay 3 life to give Arco Flagellant indestructible until end of turn. This creature also has the Squad mechanic, which is a replicate-like ability that allows us to pay 2 generic mana any number of times as we cast the spell. If we do, then when Arco Flagellant enters the battlefield, we create that many tokens that are copies of it. Note that the pay life abilities of these cards can be activated multiple times in a turn. For a few miscellaneous life-losing options, Bitter Blossom has us lose 1 life at the beginning of our upkeep, and we create a 1/1 black Fairy Rogue creature token with flying. As an additional cost to cast Hatred, we pay X life, and Hatred gives target creature +X/+0 until end of turn. Havoc Festival prevents players from gaining life, and at the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player loses half their life, rounded up. Staff of Completion offers a host of different abilities for which we can pay life. We can tap the staff and pay 1 life to destroy target permanent we own. We can pay 2 life to add 1 mana of any color. We can pay 3 life to proliferate, and we can pay 4 life to draw a card. We also can pay 5 generic mana to untap the staff, which allows us to utilize it multiple times in a turn, much to the delight of our general. Now that we have inundated the core of this EDH build with cards that cause us to lose life, let's showcase some game-ending X spells that will be juiced up by using Rowan's activated ability. Damnable Pact has target player draw X cards and lose X life. Exsanguinate and Bond of Agony have each opponent lose X life. Exsanguinate gains us life equal to the life lost this way, while Bond of Agony has us pay X life as an additional cost to cast it. Torment of Hailfire has each opponent lose 3 life unless that player sacrifices a non-land permanent or discards a card. This process is repeated X times. The cut side of Cut to Ribbons deals 4 damage to target creature, which is a reasonable return on the investment of 1 and 1 red mana. However, it is the Ribbons portion of this card that provides the best value in this build. It has Aftermath, which means that we can only cast it from our graveyard, and when we do, we exile it upon resolution. Ribbons has each opponent lose X life. Electro Dominance deals X damage to any target, and we may cast a spell with mana value X or less from our hand without paying its mana cost. Fall of the Titans has a mana cost of XX red, but through the use of its Surge mechanic, we can cast this spell for X in a red as long as we have cast another spell this turn. Fall of the Titans deals X damage to each of up to 2 targets. Jaya's Immolating Inferno deals X damage to each of up to 3 targets, but since it is a legendary sorcery, we can only cast it if we control a legendary creature or planeswalker. Fireball costs 1 generic mana more to cast for each target beyond the first. It deals X damage, divided evenly and rounded down among any number of those targets. Comet Storm has Multi-Kicker, which means we can pay an additional 1 generic mana any number of times as we cast the spell. We choose any target, and then choose another target for each time Comet Storm was kicked. It deals X damage to each target. Crackle with Power deals 5 times X damage to each of up to X targets. There is a lot to unpack with this spell, most notably its XXX mana cost. We must pay the same amount of mana for each X in this card's mana cost. So let's say that X is 5. We pay 5 plus 5 plus 5 for the 3 instances of X, and we pay our 2 red mana. We cast this spell, and if it resolves, we deal 25 damage to each of up to 5 targets. Considering we have Rowan's unique Rakdos-friendly activated ability at our disposal, this example is actually a pretty conservative scenario to what this type of build can accomplish from a game-ending direct damage standpoint. Since the theme of this build is self-inflicted life loss, let's include a last smattering of cards that synergize with and enhance this Rakdos-driven theme. Whenever we pay life, we put that many blood counters onto Font of Agonies. We can pay 1 generic mana and 1 black mana and remove 4 blood counters from this enchantment in order to destroy target creature. We should be able to manage the battlefield quite easily with Font of Agonies. Let's include some cards for the purposes of recouping our lost life. Whenever an opponent loses life, Exquisite Blood has us gain that much life. We can tap and sacrifice Magus of the Mirror to exchange life totals with target opponent, an ability we can only activate during our upkeep. Profane Transfusion and Soul Conduit have 2 target players exchange life totals. The Transfusion creates an XX colorless horror artifact creature token, where X is the difference between those players' life totals, while the Conduit can be used multiple times throughout the game. With these cards, we can swap our depleted life total for a more robust one. Rowan approves. Instead of recouping life lost, let's have our opponents feel what it's like by including a copy of Repay in Kind. Each player's life total becomes the lowest total among all players. If we spend the majority of the game self-inflicting life loss, then our life total should plummet quite quickly. By casting Repay in Kind, we bring our opponent's life totals down to our level, which should lead to a very easy victory soon after. Generally, in building around series videos like this one, we leave the mana base in the hands of each individual deck brewer. Why does that sound familiar? Anyway, we would be remiss if we failed to mention some fabulously synergistic options for our theme. There it is again. Well, anyway, for some one-time life loss effects, we can tap, pay 1 life, and sacrifice Prismatic Vista to put a basic land card from our library into play. These fetch lands follow suit and can put a swamp or mountain card from our library onto our side of the battlefield. For another one-time loss of life, any of these fetch lands can put Blood Crypt onto the battlefield. It comes into play tapped unless we pay 2 life, which is an ability we plan to activate if Rowan is on our side of the battlefield. When we tap Cabal Pit and Barbarian Ring for mana, they deal 1 point of damage to us in the process. Through their respective threshold mechanics, we can pay a black mana, tap and sacrifice the pit to give target creature -2/-2 until end of turn, and we can pay a red mana, tap and sacrifice the ring to deal 2 damage to any target. We have Threshold when our graveyard has at least 7 cards in it. We can tap Ithmir Deadlands and Ramunap Ruins and pay 1 life to respectively add a black or red mana to our mana pool. These lands can also tap to add a colorless mana, and they have abilities that are activated by paying 2 generic mana and 2 black mana, or 2 generic mana and 2 red mana, tapping them and sacrificing a desert. When we do, we respectively put 2 -1/-1 counters on target creature and opponent controls, or deal 2 damage to each opponent. We also can tap Mana Confluence and Spire of Industry and pay 1 life to add 1 mana of any color to our mana pool. Note that we can only activate this ability for Spire of Industry as long as we control an artifact. Otherwise, we can tap it to add a colorless mana. Mount Doom follows suit, except it adds either a black or a red mana. It also has activated abilities that include dealing 1 point of damage to each opponent by paying 1, a black, and a red and tapping it, as well as choosing up to 2 creatures and then destroying the rest by paying 5, a black, a red, tapping Mount Doom, and sacrificing it and a legendary artifact. This is an ability we can only activate as a sorcery. Both Talisman of Indulgence and Sulphurous Springs tap to add a colorless mana, or they tap to add a black or a red mana, and they deal 1 point of damage to us. City of Brass taps to add 1 mana of any color, and whenever it becomes tapped, it deals 1 point of damage to us. Tarnished Citadel taps to add a colorless mana, or it taps to add 1 mana of any color, and it deals 3 damage to us. Tomb of Urami taps to add 1 black mana to our mana pool, and it deals 1 point of damage to us unless we control an ogre. It also has an activated ability that requires us to sacrifice all lands we control for the purposes of creating a 5/5 black demon spirit creature token with flying named Urami, which is an ability we do not recommend activating. Ancient Tomb adds 2 colorless mana to our mana pool and deals 2 damage to us. Tapping this land early and often can lead to explosive turns with Rowan on our side of the battlefield. Castle Lochthwain enters the battlefield tapped unless we control a swamp, and it taps to add a black mana. We can also pay 1 generic mana and 2 black mana and tap it to draw a card, and then we lose life equal to the number of cards in our hand. This seemingly innocuous and, at times, unplayable ability synergizes quite well with Rowan. Continuing our card-drawing trend, we can pay 3 generic mana, tap War Room, and pay life equal to the number of colors in our commander's color identity, which is 2, in order to draw a card. Bosaidu, who shelters all, enters the battlefield tapped. We can tap it and pay 2 life to add a colorless mana to our mana pool, and if that mana is spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell, then that spell cannot be countered. This is great insurance against any blue mages at the table hoping to counter one of our aforementioned game-ending instant or sorcery spells. Hall of the Bandit Lord also enters the battlefield tapped. We can tap it and pay 3 life to add 1 colorless mana to our mana pool. If that mana is spent on a creature spell, it gains haste. By using the mana generated by Hall of the Bandit Lord to cast Rowan, we can use her activated ability the turn she comes into play, as opposed to allowing her to remain vulnerable to removal and waiting to utilize her activated ability during our next turn. Speaking of vulnerability and waiting until our next turn to activate Rowan's ability, let's not by including protection and haste enablers in the forms of Lightning Greaves and Swiftfoot Boots. The Greaves gives the equipped creature haste and shroud, while the Boots gives it hexproof and haste. Attaching either of these equipment to Rowan will make her even deadlier. 1,000-Year Elixir does not give creatures we control haste, but we may activate abilities of creatures we control as though they did have haste, which suits Rowan very, very well. Even more so when considering that we can pay 1 generic mana and tap 1,000-Year Elixir to untap target creature, which allows us to activate Rowan's ability twice during our turn. It's a great time to be a Rakdos player, maybe not so much for our opponents. This video provided a blueprint for building the core of a Rakdos commander deck with Rowan's Scion of War as the general. The cards showcased during this video are suggested options for crafting the thematic core of a Rakdos EDH deck, in addition to providing ways of optimizing this theme. Removal spells, disruption, ramp, and the Landbase can vary from build to build, and also are dependent on metagame preferences and availability. In building around videos like this one, these deck components are left in the hands of each individual deck brewer. If you found this video appealing, then be sure to check out our other building around videos through the playlist on your screen. Also be sure to check out our other deck building series, and don't forget to let me know your thoughts about the core of this Rowan build in the comment section below. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things magic.